Event logging. Control B.6. And it exists because of an uncomfortable truth: most breached organizations already had the evidence. They just weren't reading it. Here's the breach that proves it. July 2019. Capital One discloses that an attacker has accessed its cloud environment and taken the personal data of around 100 million people in the United States and 6 million in Canada. Names, addresses, dates of birth, income, credit scores, and social security numbers for 140,000 of them. The regulator fined them $80 million, and the class action settled for $190 million more. The way-in was a misconfigured web application firewall. It ran on a cloud server that had been given a far more powerful identity role than it needed. By sending a specially crafted request, the attacker made that firewall hand over its own temporary cloud credentials, and those credentials could list and read the company's data stores. But here is the part that should stop you. The logging worked perfectly. AWS CloudTrail captured the credential handover, the source IP address the credentials were then used from, and every single bulk data call that followed in near real time, for 4 months. The evidence was flawless and complete. Nobody was reading it. Capital One only found out when an outside party reported a GitHub repository containing the stolen data. So what is event logging? It is the systematic capture and retention of security-relevant activity across your environment. And it is worth being precise here: logging is not the same as SIEM. Logging is capturing and keeping the events. SIEM, which is the next control, is analyzing and correlating them. Logging is the raw material. Without it, nothing downstream works. Without adequate logging, things become impossible. You cannot detect an incident as it happens. You cannot reconstruct what an attacker did afterwards, because the forensic trail does not exist. You cannot produce evidence of who accessed what and when. And you cannot meet the retention obligations your regulators impose. At Capital One, the gaps were specific. No alerting on credentials being used from an IP address that had no business using them. CloudTrail records the source IP on every call, so this was detectable. An identity role on the firewall that was far broader than its job required, which turned a monitoring gap into a 100 million record breach. No review process at all, which turns logging into telemetry that produces no security value. And log sources that were never centralized, so nobody could correlate the multi-step attack. So what does good look like? Comprehensive coverage, authentication successes and failures, privilege escalation, access to sensitive data, network connections, configuration changes, and administrative actions. Centralized aggregation, forwarding logs to a repository outside the control of the systems that generated them. Integrity protection, so the people whose activity is recorded cannot edit the record right once storage in the cloud. A defined retention period, commonly 12 to 24 months, longer in financial services. A real review process with documented outcomes. And privileged user activity captured and reviewed as its own high-risk category. How does an auditor test it? You map every in-scope system to the log sources policy requires, and any gap is a finding. You confirm logs are forwarded to storage that the system administrators cannot alter. You review the integrity controls and the retention configuration. Then you do the practical test, request logs from the earliest date inside the retention period and confirm they can actually be retrieved. And most importantly, you ask for evidence that someone genuinely reviews them: alert records, review reports, documented outcomes. 5 lessons. 1. Turn on every available log source. In cloud environments, most of them are opt-in and default to off. 2. Centralize before you analyze, because logs sitting in the system that made them are hard to correlate and easy to tamper with. 3. Protect your logs as carefully as your data, because attackers target the logs first to cover their tracks. 4. Define what reviewing logs actually means: a policy saying logs are reviewed regularly, with no owner, frequency, or definition of a finding, is not a control. And 5. Use your cloud provider's built-in anomaly detection as well, because it catches things your rules will not. Event logging is Control B.6 in the ITGC framework. I'm walking through every one with the breach that proves why it matters every week at marcoweb.org. Subscribe to get them in your inbox, and try the free ITGC audit tool.